So thank you so much for being willing to spend the time with us here.
My pleasure.
For the people that aren't aware of who you are, would you mind telling us who you are and just a bit about like what you do in relation to young people?
So I have always worked with children and young people in my
Yeah.
entire career across a whole lot of different things. So I've been a family therapist, I've been a researcher, I've been a policy advisor, I've been a leader in service delivery, and all of that ended up with me being the Commissioner for Children and Young People in New South Wales, and it was the first time in Australia we'd had a Commissioner for Children and Young People. And that role was really, I guess, recognition that children can't vote, and so we need to have other ways and other mechanisms for getting their voice and their experience and their interests into the political decision-making process.
Yeah.
And so as Commissioner, that was my role, was to take children and young people's lived experience and with their help then try and influence government and business and community decisions around that impacted on children and young people. So whether that was transport or arts or education or health, whatever, built environment, planning, design, you know, you name it, because all of those things that governments and community and business do impact on children and young people. But their voices and lived experience can often not be included. Or can be forgotten or can be muted in the decision-making table.
And I'm really interested because you've had such a long career that I guess is adjacent to youth arts.
Mm-hmm.
You've worked with children for so long, not necessarily in the arts, but you obviously have worked with a lot of wonderful young people who may have been artists. And I'm interested if you can think of a time when you were working with these young people and I guess sharing their narratives, because that's what theatre and arts is all about, it's storytelling. When you can remember when the youth arts sector made a significant difference, whether it be for like one child or many children?
Gosh, well, so many times. I mean, the youth arts working with marginalised kids, I certainly saw that and the impact that had on those children's views of themselves and their views of each other. One of the first things I did when I became Commissioner and we had our own offices was that I employed an artist to work with children and young people to do a whole lot of artworks that we then used to put throughout the building. And it was really interesting and also worked with actors so that we had children and young people, you know, on the telephones and so on. And it was interesting the number of times adults, non-young people, said to me how much that helped them orient to children and young people's interests, because they were surrounded by, in a sense, the voice of children and young people. It's a very little example of the arts, if you like.
But it's like still incredibly lovely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm interested because obviously such a big part of your work is advocacy, is the notion of we consider ourselves a democracy where everyone has a voice. What do you do for the people that can't activate that political democracy and vote? So children, I'm really interested for young artists or any young person who is going out and advocating, whether it be to their family, to their community, or to the government for support for what they believe is important. What's your one piece of advice for young people getting into advocacy and that are trying to figure out how to advocate when it's not really something they're told they're allowed to do?
Yeah, it is really interesting, that thing about you've got to do what adults tell you to do. As a child, you're required to do that, and in fact there are consequences that can be quite significant if you don't do that. And so then finding your own voice in that context does require you to think through, think about yourself and to have confidence in yourself, and to probably form alliances with others who can support you and help you in that.
Yeah.
So I do think that is something that's quite unique about children's voice, if you like, and that is that point you made, which is that in fact children are told to do what adults say, and yet at the same time we're saying to them, advocate for yourself and speak up. And I think a lot of that is actually probably not so much the young people's responsibility, but the adults' responsibility to recognise when a child or young person needs guidance and limits and so on, versus when a young person absolutely should be talking up and speaking up. So I think a lot of it's about adults changing how they behave and how they think and how they view the status of children, rather than children themselves having to be different. I mean, I get so angry when people say you're being childish, as though being a child
is a negative thing.
And I think it is so disrespectful of children's development and how children express themselves, and it's a dismissal of children's way of the world, and it's adultist.
Yeah, I think
you like.
The keynote speaker on the second day made a really great point, Adam, when he said, it's all about adults being better adults so that children can just be children, which is just such a valid point. And we had a speaker in a video on the first day say, I'm valuable now. As a child, I'm not valuable in 10 years. I'm valuable in the moment.
Yeah, and there's another thing that really riles me is that children are our future. Well, we're all our future, but we don't see adults only in terms of their future. But there's a very strong cultural thing, or political cultural thing, about only seeing children in relation to their future, rather than recognising the value that they bring to the present,
in the moment,
and the now. And I think again an example of the low status really that children have paradoxically in our world, because at the same time people sort of say, oh well, children are our most precious beings and we have to put children first, but we don't actually live that as adults in our world and in our politics and our economics.
Yeah, and it's an interesting dual point that we're trying to shift the cultural value around arts. At the same time, we're trying to shift the cultural value around children. So it's interesting that both those things that obviously we're very, very passionate about are having this dual struggle that kind of intersects in the youth arts sector.
Absolutely.
Where you're arguing for the value of arts and for children.
That's right, and both are, their value is dismissed and muted, if you like. So yeah, it is an intersection of two low status things coming together, and I think we see that reflected in the funding and in the spaces and in the effort that as a community, as a society, we give to youth arts.
Thank you very much. You spoke very well. I said some things that I was like, true.